So this is a bit about design hacking and generative design in general. And maybe the point I like to start making about this is that we've heard this kind of phrasing along a lot of times, and this is something they speak about in design school very often. It's a common phrase that nowadays kids know all there is to know about the creative software we use for design. And so the design schools usually tell you that all they can teach you is how to think, because everyone can use the tool, so supposedly the only thing that's missing is how to think. And I kind of disagree with that, but I think the main interesting point about this is that if everyone uses the same tools, what happens if we tinker with the tools? And I have a good friend called Dan, who's an illustrator, and we went to design school together. And he always, during his illustration studies, he always was obsessed with the process, which is very interesting. So I would see him like in the middle of the night running around in school and asking him, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to draw this really small, this sketch. It's going to be 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. Then I'm going to Xerox it to 2000%. And then I'm going to draw it again. And then I'm going to scan it. And then I'm going to add type in the computer. And I'm not sure what I'm going to make, but somehow it's going to be awesome. So his whole thinking was around the process of making something rather than having a clear plan of what he was making, which for me was really fascinating. And so if, coming back to this, if everyone is using the same tools, let's tinker with the tools. So if we know as interaction designers that the software we use kind of maybe points us into specific maybe solutions or ways of looking at things because we work with software and what's easy in the software is sometimes easy for us. If we mix the software up, if we add tools, quite quickly we'll end up with interesting results. So this is kind of the point of view of talking about generative design and maybe tinkering with the tools in general, which we'll get to later if we still have time. So a bit about generative design. So obviously we should know the tools very, very well before we start tinkering with them, because otherwise we don't have a solid ground on which to grow. But what I'd like to do now is walk you through a series of interesting tools that some are readily available, some are less available, that are really fascinating to use and are mainly kind of mind openers. And as doing that, I'll try to walk you through some examples of projects we've used these things in the past where it's applicable, and try to show you some quick demos of how this works. So we'll start with a simple tool from Apple called Core Image Funhouse. I'm pretty sure basically barely anyone is familiar with this, and they basically killed this roughly 6 months ago. But you can still get this, and we'll share the actual app with you because it's kind of, they only distribute it by source now, which is annoying, but it's very easy to compile and we have it ready. And it's a tool from Apple that is supposed to explain a framework from Apple called Core Image. So Core Image is Apple's library for coding graphic effects. It basically is Photoshop in a box. So it basically is Photoshop in a box. So what it does, it has every effect you can imagine that Photoshop has. Basically, you can programmatically do with it in Xcode when you code Mac apps or iPhone apps and so forth. But Code Image Funhouse specifically is a small GUI app that lets you take an image and put a stack of live effects on top of it, play around with their parameters, basically made to help people explore the framework. So you can play around, see what it does, and then later you can write the code that does it for your app. But it's also very useful as just a playground for doing a bunch of graphic stuff, which is basically great. So this is a screenshot of how it looks. It's basically one window. You put an image into it, and then you hit plus, and you stack a bunch of filters on top of it, and then you play with the sliders and the numbers, and things update in the background. So what I'd like to do quickly is demo it to you. I hope you'll be able to see it without a long lag. Please let me know. And Eva, since I'm in a full screen slide, I'm not able to see most of the chat. So you can hijack the mic for a second if you can't hear me or there's a lag or something like that. So let's run Core Image Funhouse. So I've ran the app, and basically the only thing it does, it shows me like this empty window, and it asks me to load an image. So, and it comes pre-built with an image of Copenhagen, surprisingly enough. So if I open that, after a while, because it's a bit buggy, I get this window on the background showing me the image. And it starts with just that image. But when I hit plus, I can add effects. So I can add, let's say, a Gaussian blur effect. And I can play around with the radius, and it updates live. And my machine here is working a bit slow because of the video capturing, but this thing is pretty snappy. And I can add another effect on top of that, like color adjustment, let's say U adjust, and I can apply that on top of that. And I can play with the U values, and hopefully you can see the color changing, and I can still play with the blurriness values on top of it. And when I hover over the image area, I can still drag the origin of the image. So all of this stuff is live. And this is kind of nice, but it starts getting really visually fancy when you add tile effects. So again, they have all the effects here because the purpose is to teach you all these effects. So if we add a kaleidoscope here, we get a kaleidoscope, and this is, I'm not sure if you can see, there's a small anchor here. You can drag the kaleidoscope center, and you can drag the image anchor, and these are live, so I can play with the angle, and I still have this hue adjustment on top of it, so both are live, which is kind of nice. How many repetitions are in the kaleidoscope, the angle of the kaleidoscope, and so forth. And here we're starting to see the potential of it being mostly a very nice playground for quickly brainstorming stuff. So you could say, we need this image for a website for something, and we want to blur it and then color cast it and then put something on top of it. And you can put all of these quickly here, lay images one above each other, save a lot because this crashes every second basically, and play around with it. So this was a quick example of a kaleidoscope, but if I put here, let's say an op-tile is pretty impressive. So I've got an op-tile, I can drag it around, I can scale it up and down, the tiles themselves, and I can make the whole thing bigger, and then I can spin it, which is always very nice. So that was Core Image Funhouse. Any text questions? Not yet? Okay. So that was Core Image Funhouse. We'll share a folder on Dropbox with everything we show you today, especially this, because you can only get it in source code. So moving on, this is something is fairly well-known tool called processing. So processing is maybe the most well-known generative design tool. It's open source. It's very, very well documented, and it's filled with examples and frameworks and tools everywhere on the web. Basically, for those less familiar, it's a small app where you write simplified Java code, and there are a lot of books very well documenting this simpler version of Java, and you've got thousands of samples to play with, and you hit play, and it runs, and it shows you simple things. And you can do a lot of stuff with it. And this is an example of 3D terrain we generated for a graphic for a client. We had a project called IQU, where we've done a website for MMO, massive multiplayer online gaming advertising platform for our client, and we needed really rich kind of a gaming graphics to go along with some of the designs. And this is something, again, this is processing. So we didn't have to start making this on our own. We found a bunch of 3D terrain samples, and we hacked them up together, changed a few parameters, edited tons of stuff, and this is one of the pieces of graphics we came up with. And we later used it for a bunch of stuff. This is kind of a process diagrams and a bunch of other things. So we don't use processing as much here because it's a little bit less straightforward than some of the other things we like to use, which I'll show you in a second. But it's very, very useful. Most of what it outputs is pixel data as opposed to vector stuff. So you draw pixels, and then you can export PNGs or TIFFs or something like that out of it. But you can also get sources for saving into PDFs, in which case you're creating code that creates PDFs on screen, and then you save them to a disk, and then you can reopen them in something like Illustrator and continue designing from there. So up until now, that was processing. And the next tool, and this is something everyone should try out. It's amazingly cute. It's called Quartz Composer, and the people I've met recently, I spent a lot of time talking about this. And this tool was also just now gained a lot of recognition because the guys at Facebook use it quite extensively to prototype rich animations in Facebook Home. So all of this physics, graphics, you drag a face circle and it bumps down, back, and all of this stuff. You can do really great animations to up to 60 FPS. Great stuff with Quartz Composer. So to get it, you need to get something called Graphic Tools for Xcode, which is something that's downloadable through this link, and we'll give it to all of you later. Basically what it is, it's a node-based visual language for mixing image, audio, video, code, and other media, all in this language where you put these nodes in and you wire them together. And these nodes can be inputs like image, video, audio files themselves. You just drag them from your desktop, or they can be pieces of these blocks that can actually do something. So in the same way that we've seen core image effects like blur, optile, kaleidoscope, and so forth before, the same effects are available here, and you can take in an image and you can chain it with a blur, chain it with something else, and then display it on screen. And the interesting thing about Quartz Composer is that these compositions are used excessively on the Mac. So Quartz Composer file, which are called .qtz, .qtz, and if you look for these files on your Mac, you would find tons of them because they are used as screensavers on your Mac. They are used as iTunes visualizers, and they can be used as things you just drag into a Keynote slide deck, and they just work. And they are also playable on any Mac with QuickTime, but no PCs with QuickTime. And they even work on the web, but they would only work in Safari, which is basically means they don't work, but still, it's sometimes useful. And we use them a lot with some tiny things in Keynote. You can even build small prototypes and put them in Keynote, and they would work. So this is really interesting. And I've used Quartz Composer to create a series of interactive posters back when I was in design school. And we use them for a bunch of small stuff, like prototyping animations within user experience projects and generating visuals in a lot of other cases. So I'd really like to demo it quickly to you now so you can see that it's fairly easy. Any questions until now? No. Okay. So if I run Quartz Composer, and I have this launcher here, I just recently downloaded a new version. Give me a second. It opens up with this template chooser, and I can choose some templates which are already pre-existent, and then I would have things like I hope you can see this. I'm dragging my cursor here, and it changes the blur of the photo as I do it. So, and we can do like music visualizers, which already you can see that are affected by the sound I'm making. RSS visualizers, which is basically the RSS screensaver you might know from macOS. All kinds of screensavers, and even 3D stuff. So I'm not very fluent with OpenGL, but you can basically write OpenGL code, complete OpenGL code with there's a small code editor inside. You can write small OpenCL stuff, all inside Quartz Composer, and you can write a simpler JavaScript code and mix it up with other things. So it's really interesting, and the most important thing, you can do things with no code, which is always nice. So let me choose a really basic composition here quickly, and I get this empty window, and the only thing that's annoying with this app is this window management issue, like some other Apple apps, where it's not integrated into one window, so I have to continuously organize it. So give me a second here. Okay, so basically it's made out of this library, which opens up if I hit Command-Enter or just patch library. And I'm not familiar with too many of those, but basically these are things that when you drag them into the canvas, they become these blocks. And you wire these blocks together to get all sorts of results. So let's do this really quickly, delete all of this, and drag an image from my desktop, just a random image here. So I've got this image on the desktop. So it's black because it's a black box, which is the source coming from the outside. And if I want to project it on screen, I need a billboard. So I'm putting in a billboard, and I'm connecting the image with the image of the billboard. And then I've got the image on screen. So this is fairly simple. But then I want to clear the screen. I want a background, so I'm using clear. And I'm saying it should be on layer 1 below the billboard. So then I've got a black background with the billboard. And this is simple enough. So let's quickly take a look at the same thing we've done with Core Image Funhouse here. So if I look for Gaussian blur, and I drag a blur in here, and I rewire the image through the blur now, I hope you can see that the image on the right here is now blurred. And if I go and do a window, where is that, inspector? If I open up the inspector for this box, I can say, what is the radius of the blur? So I can replay, and everything is live. Obviously, I can play with this in live. And then let's say I want to do a hue adjust. So I can use the same UAdjust, rewire the image through the UAdjust into the billboard, and then play with the UAdjust. So the nice thing about all of this is simpler stuff now, but the nice thing about Quartz Composer is how media works with this. So I hope I can do this as we're using a video conference, because I'm not sure the audio input would work, but let's try. I can do an audio input that affects, let's see if it actually affects. Yeah, it seems to actually affect. That affects the angle of this UAdjust. So the volume pick of the input it takes from my microphone here on the Mac becomes the angle of the UAdjust. But it's pretty subtle, so that you can barely see the changes. So if I put in a math box, and I want to rewire this, and I want to multiply it, let's say I want to multiply it by 100, and then still doesn't work. Should work though. Didn't rewire it all the way. So then, whenever I speak, you can see the image changing size, and you can do basically the same with the amount of the blur. And then you've got something that responds to my speech and blurs the image and changes the hue as we do it, which is pretty great. And basically the same thing could happen if we switch between the audio input to video input. And again, I'm not sure this would work concurrently to the video conference, but let's try. So I rewire the image coming from my video camera. Not sure this is going to work. Doesn't work while we're inputting this. But basically, I can rewire the stuff coming in from my webcam into the Gaussian blur, into the UAdjust, and being affected from the audio input. So you can build a bunch of cool stuff with this, and you can make those screensavers. And I think it's easy to see now how you make these audio reactive screensavers or iTunes visualizers and so forth. So this was Quartz Composer, and I'd like to show you a quick demo. I hope it doesn't open up. Let me go all the way to find it. Should take a second. So this is this interactive poster, and I hope you can see that it started off being just a vector poster because it's showing an image. But then if I make a lot of noise, sorry for hoping it didn't hurt in your earphones, we get this 3D emitted particles with the small logos of whatever that was playing around between two PNGs here, one of the background and one of the foreground topography. So that was a quick example, and basically it looks the same. It's a bunch of stuff rewired together, and most of the graphic work is done by either this particle generator or these typography drawn in Hebrew, in English, in a PNG on top of it. So that was Quartz Composer. Any questions? Jesper is typing. So, hey Jesper. So none of this Quartz Composer stuff works on the web. I haven't mentioned though that the primary use of Quartz Composer was supposed to be to create compositions which you can then associate with code that runs on the Mac. So if you look at products like iMovie or iPhoto or a bunch of other stuff, or video VJ programs that need live rich media effects, what you would see is they're using Quartz compositions internally within the product. So they've made a Quartz composition that creates some effect, and they're reusing it in iMovie for these things. On the web, though, you can't really use this. There's a bunch of other stuff that you can use, but Quartz Composer would only work in Safari and wouldn't work anywhere else. And I'm betting also Safari only on the Mac. So this is quite nice for demonstrating animations. We've done prototypes that present to clients how specifically something should behave. And you can do some interactivity with mouse. You can do, I think, even face recognition, keyboard stuff. You can do a bunch of stuff that is useful in the real world. And we've actually made, I think, the most recent thing we've made with this. Let me show this to you. It'll take me a second. We've made a screensaver for one of our, there's a case study online in Designit.com of SCR. That's a dairy product technology company. And we've just actually finished a small screensaver for them, although I think it will take me a few seconds to find it, which uses the same thing, Quartz Composer. There it is. I hope you can see this. This is like they have like a cow symbol, and we're spinning a bunch of, this is an earlier sketch. We're spinning a bunch of shapes inside, and this is one of the earlier versions, and we've done really fancy, cute, fancy stuff with this. And we basically gave this away to the client for free, and they should get a big flat screen TV and connect it to some Mac and have this like running on the background of their offices or something like that. So there's a lot of potential with these things. Let me just close Quartz Composer here. So that was Quartz Composer. So you get this from this link, and we'll share these links with you. It's called Graphics Tools for Xcode. You need a developer ID, but I think it's safe to say we can share this specific file with you, or at least the link, and it should work fine. So until now, we talked about Quartz Composer, which is Mac only, and now we're talking about another generative tool, and this is something I personally love. This is what we use most, and it's called NodeBox. So NodeBox is available on nodebox.net. Back when we gave this talk in Barcelona, this was Mac only, but it was always open source. But now, since then, this is NodeBox 1, which we'll take a look at. But since then, the NodeBox 2 and NodeBox 3 were released. Both are cross-platform, and both are less code-centered. So it's really interesting. I really, really recommend you go take a look on nodebox.net. There's a lot of interesting examples here. And this recent version is also node-based, kind of like Quartz Composer, maybe not as easy. And there's a lot of interesting examples, and you can still get NodeBox 1. So, and we're also in very good connections with Tom, the founder of this great tool. And we can connect with him if we need it for anything, and he's a great guy. So NodeBox 1 was awesome. What it did, and it still does, and you write Python code, scripting language called Python, which is quite nice and fairly simple, and it generates vector graphics. So that is the important thing for us, because we love having someone generate vector graphics for us, because that means we can merge this into our tool chain, because we can add something we can code against. We can do either laborious tasks or just repetitive things or just generative things. And we can take the output and we can bring it back into Illustrator for continuing the design process. And we've done this for a bunch of projects. It was really, really great for us. So let me show you. So this is basically a very, very simple NodeBox window. You write a bunch of Python code on the right, or more correctly, you get a bunch of examples and you basically tinker with them. And then on the left, you get results. And some of them can be interactive. I'll show you this specific one in a second. And then on the menu on top, you've got a command saying copy as PDF. And you just go to Illustrator and you paste. And you've got vector stuff, which you can take back into the design process and use. So actually, the way I got to Nascent, which was the name of the Israeli company that was bought by the Designit and merged into being Designit Tel Aviv, the way I got there almost 6 years ago is because my first gig was writing a script that served as a basis for a brand language with it for a brand of really high-end Kodak cameras, 50 megapixels a few years back, called Leaf. So they called me up and said, you know, we need a script. We have this leaf. We want to put it many, many times over this path. Can you help us do this? And obviously the answer was yes. So we built this tool, and the nice thing about NodeBox is you can create this small tinkering UI. So you put in a bunch of variables and you say you want these to have a GUI, and then you get, when you run the script, you get these sliders. So I'm going to show you in a second how you play with those and how they affect the way the script works. So basically what we did is I created a tool to help the team here do continuing the graphic work for the brand. And this is one screenshot of what they've done with it. This is the tagline for Leaf, our science, your art. And these graphics were generated by the script with NodeBox and then brought in back to the design process and worked on more. This is specifically designed by our partner, Roy. So, and this became later, it became the packaging for their signature camera, and became in many other things later on. So let me break here for a second and show you some NodeBox. Any questions until now? Nope. So this is a very, very simple, actually it's not that simple, it's a sample from the NodeBox website. And what it does, it draws Cornu curves. So Cornu is another way similar to Bezier for calculating curves. And what it does, it creates kind of a circle between 2 points. So this script let me drag these points and then draws a Cornu curve between them, and it lets me add points. And it continues to draw a curve, but it's kind of like a small vector drawing app for Cornu curves. And the nice thing about these curves is they're pretty harmonious, because the way that they calculate circles between the points gives you pretty interesting, quite strong vector results as you work on it. And you can zoom out here a little bit, and we can create these things, and we can redrag the shapes. And the interesting part about this is, let's say we have something, maybe there's potential, we go to edit, and then we do copy image as PDF. And when we do that, we can go off to Illustrator, hit a new file, and paste it inside Illustrator. And it's just a vector shape like, oh, sorry. It is just a vector shape like anything else in Illustrator. So we can come back and we can, even the handles, right? Because they're also vector shapes. So, and then we can do a bunch of other stuff we can do in Illustrator. And this is great because we can generate a bunch of these things. And then we copy it and we paste another one. And we do another one. And we take that one again. And we can use this as a way to generate things. And these are kind of crude, but you can generate interesting stuff. And then I'm not trying to get this script to solve the design for me. I'm only trying to augment the tools and add another thing that lets me give something extra to the tools I use. So now I have something else generating visuals for me, and I can retake that into the design process. So any quick questions about that? Okay. So what I want to show you also, let me go to the server now for a second to do that. Maybe to the drive. This is pretty old. But I want to show you the results of the leaf script. So basically the script, if we run it now, yeah, this one is fairly simple, a bit of GUI, but still. It takes 2 SVG files, both exported from Illustrator. One is the leaf, and the other is this spiral path, just as an example. And it multiplies the leaf and changes its orientation or color depending on this GUI along the path. So I've added a checkbox here saying scale gradient. So I can say the initial scale is really big, and then I hope you can see as it continues throughout the path, the leaves get smaller. And I can say rotate gradient. So I start with a specific rotation, and then they rotate along the path. I can skip a few, I can make less repetitions or more repetitions to make this not too heavy. And then I can play with color. So I can say the minimum, I built this with CMYK, so the maximum amounts of cyan, maximum amounts of magenta and black and so forth, and you can control these colors. And by the way, they ended up not using this because we only use this as an entry point, and the design itself is kind of, let's say, duotone, but it's a very nice example of building another design tool which the team then uses within the project. So this doesn't solve the exercise for us, it just augments the tools we use. So another really nice thing, this is genius. Another nice thing about NodeBox is it has the command file new command, right, which gives you an empty window, and you can start typing a line from here to there. And by the way, I'm not sure why that does, oh, correct, from here to there. And you should also go to nodebox.com and go to NodeBox 1. And this is the best code documentation I've ever seen in my life. Everything is color-coded, separated into categories, really concise, showing you simple examples. If you copy and paste the example in NodeBox, it just works. And this is very nice because you've got a bunch of other things which just work. You just paste these things and they just work, and then you can tinker with their values and get stuff. So this is really nice, but the genius thing is that you've got something here called new with code. So this is NodeBox automatically generating a bunch of trash or let's say filler Python code that generates a bunch of visuals completely randomly. So let me show you this to you. I just click it and it just dumps a bunch of random code, Python code, which generates a bunch of funny visuals. Some of them do nothing because they are random code, so it might not work. So then you can take this as an input and then kind of try and tame it, delete some of the code, change about the numbers, learn a bit of Python, and then I can always just hit edit, copy as PDF, go back to Illustrator, hit Command V, like paste it, and there I've got this, and it's vector, right? It's the same vector stuff, as you can see. So NodeBox is quite awesome. Any quick questions on NodeBox? Question? So I think you should definitely try Quartz Composer really quickly because it's a very satisfying thing to play with media quickly and do animations. For doing more specifically graphic design related work, sometimes NodeBox for me is the most useful thing. But I think those are the top two out of maybe Scriptographer, which I'll show you in a second, but they're very useful. NodeBox 1 is quite useful for simple Python code, and if you have anyone that writes Python, that's very useful. NodeBox 2 and 3 have a bit more of a learning curve for me because I'm already used to NodeBox 1, but since they're a node base where you can rewire stuff like in Quartz Composer, maybe it's easier to get started with, I'm not sure. You should try out. I'm betting either NodeBox 1 and 3, not 2 in the middle. So, and we've used NodeBox for a bunch of other stuff, which I wanted to show you. This is a series of kind of generative infographic posters, which lists on a certain Mac all of the typefaces that are installed. And the way it does that is for each typeface, it writes the typeface name in the font itself. It sorts them by their weight, the weight of the font. And then it kind of hangs them from a pushpin. So there's like a white pushpin here. And if the font is really light, it like kind of flies above. If it's really heavy, it flies. It kind of is dumped below. And this is this like poster. And the stuff on the right is basically bugs in the code on the way to get there. So as we wrote this, we got a bunch of bugs and we got all of these weird results. And this is a less practical but an interesting project. The earliest version, the earliest thing we've done with NodeBox back at Nascent, this is almost 5 years ago, is we used it as a basis for an identity for an interesting company no longer existent called Mercado, which was an Israeli e-commerce infrastructure software company. And the concept, the brand story written by Asaf was at the core of commerce. So this is a software infrastructure for e-commerce websites. So the story is Mercado is at the core of commerce, and we looked to visualize a core. And this is how we got to these scripts that take a bunch of circles with gradients on top of them, play around with blending modes, and try to create something that is visualized as a core. And these later became the basis of the mark, which became the basis of the identity for Mercado. Another example, a bit more recent, this is from roughly 3 years ago, I think, is the brand identity for Israeli venture capital firm in Jerusalem called JVP. So they had this beautiful mark designed by Chermayev and Geismar in New York. And one of our brand concepts tried to completely maintain it and only build on top of it because we didn't want to change it. It's beautiful. So we basically used the same script we've done for Leaf with this path of the lion here. And we used with very, very thin circles, and we overlaid them on top of this path. And then that on itself doesn't really solve the exercise. It's interesting, but it's not, it looks nice, but we didn't know what we need to do with it yet. Only taking it back into Illustrator and going forward with the brand project, we found out that it's quite useful as cropping it and using it occasionally as backgrounds, which give it a bit of a money look because it's like the small etchings you've got on cache. But also paces inside typography, with really large typography and all of this other stuff. So this is another very practical use of NodeBox we've done for a practical commercial project. So here's another screenshot of that. So, and then when the JVP project, that was a project that was pretty challenging, where it was also a bit rocky. But we were asked to do a small identity for an event. At the JVP, they have a really nice complex in Jerusalem, and the event was called Medialectica. And we used the same thing as the basis for tweaking letters for the Medialectica and tying them into the JVP brand. So that became the logo for Medialectica 2010. So we've seen a short demo of NodeBox, not writing code per se, but showing you how does it feel to use it. And I urge you to go to nodebox.net and try it out. It's really great. So let's see if there are any questions. Okay. So next we get to something quite practical called Scriptographer. So Scriptographer, hope you're not overwhelmed with all of these tools, but you should try a few of those. They're pretty great. Scriptographer is a plugin for Illustrator for writing simple scripts in JavaScript, creating tools, new drawing tools for Illustrator, but also new palettes. You can make your own like window, like the type window or the character window. You can code special things that happen when you change values in these windows, and I'll show you all that in a second. It's open source. It's both for Mac or PC. The only caveat is it doesn't work on CS6. So it only works up until CS5. But it is worth the effort just to have both installed, just to occasionally use this. So it's an interactive scripting environment from Illustrator. Maybe for the geeks among you, it's pretty important to say that Illustrator already has a scripting ability. It's called Adobe ExtendScript. It's a little bit more convoluted, and it's not directed into drawing stuff and creating visuals. It's directed towards automating tasks mostly. So Scriptographer is a bit more handy with doing visuals and GUI within Illustrator, which is why we're talking about it. So the way that it works, it adds another palette into Illustrator, which is basically a file browser for these JavaScript files, which are the scripts. And when you choose one of them and you hit play, it either shows you another one of these palettes, which was generated by the script, or it gives you a new tool to draw with. So let me show this to you. Designit London, which work was animated? All of the NodeBox work I've shown you, by the way, was static. It wasn't meant to be animated, although you can create animations in NodeBox. And there's even some ways to get it live on the web. And by the way, Jesper, I just realized I haven't mentioned because we don't use it. There's a beautiful library called D3JS, which is JavaScript, really beautiful canvas and SVG vector drawing graphics charting library for the web. This is really beautiful. You can get tons of examples of how this works very nicely. This thing is running in my browser right now, which is pretty impressive. And if we look at this, I always like the Voronoi examples. So this is when it loads. Because of the Adobe Connect, it works a bit slowly, I think, but this thing runs in my browser now, which is pretty amazing, pretty impressive. So we've worked with companies who do use this for charting within their CRM apps, and we've seen a bunch of stuff created with this, but for the web, this should be a very, very good option for deploying this stuff. So look for D3. So let me demo Scriptographer for you now. So I'm going to open a new Illustrator document and close a bunch of other stuff I have open because it's becoming too much, even though this is written on Mac. Let's close this. Let's close that. So this is Illustrator CS5, which I only keep around for this. And this is, I've got a new window now called where is it now? Scriptographer. And within Scriptographer, I have show main palette, hide main palette, and a console palette, which is less interesting for me right now. And this is this Scriptographer palette. And it comes built in with examples, as you would expect. And within tools, you've got the scripts. So if I take the wave script and I run it with play here, the thing that happens is I get a new window, the wave window, and this GUI is created by a Scriptographer script, which is great. But also, I've got this new icon here, and this is the icon that applies whenever I run a tool script, it becomes that tool in the toolbar. So now I have a tool for drawing waves, which is, it looks a bit silly, but it's not that silly because, again, this is all vector. So the distance from this to creating something quite interesting with these things is not that far away. So if I, for a second here, dump like a black background below all of this, and just start to playing around with the vector potential of these things. Specifically, waves don't really help me much here, but it's really interesting to get these new tools. So there's, let's say there's a friction tool. And as I draw it, you can see it creates these kind of spirals. And there are parameters which I can play with. Oh, I've made it too slow, less friction. And from there, again, it's quite easy to do, or it's really interesting to do interesting things with this, as you can expect. So that was a few tools. But another nice tool is pre. So if I click play again, I choose the tool again. Let's dock this window because it's annoying on top of Scriptographer. And this is a tool that draws trees. So this is quite interesting. Because again, since this is Illustrator, it's enough to put in an interesting gradient into all of this, and I really get interesting results. So again, the point is not to have the script solve the design exercise for me. The point is to augment the tools in a way that brings us new and interesting results. And I think you can see the potential here, even if we don't have a project that requires a bunch of trees drawn in full screen now. So these were tool scripts, but on top of those, we've got other scripts, and you can play with those. There are raster scripts, there are tutorials, there are a bunch of other stuff which you can see. And when you choose a script here and you hit what is that button, edit script, it connects you to whatever app is connected to OpenJS files on your Mac. In my case, weirdly, it's Safari and not a TextMate or something. But if that was text edit, I could type stuff here and just make it work, and then go back to Illustrator, rerun it. So I don't need to reboot Illustrator or anything like that. I just save the JS file and I hit play again, and it just works. So I encourage you to go to scriptographer.org, which I have open. This is a buy. I think these two guys are, one is Finnish and one is Belgium. I think I've met them in London a few years back. Really great, interesting guys. They have a new project, also kind of similar to D3, called paper.js. And maybe you guys came across this, and this is again interactive in my browser. Kind of similar to D3. I haven't used both. I'm kind of more inclined towards desktop stuff than JavaScript-based tools. But it's also supposed to be very interesting, and this runs in a browser, so it doesn't run on non-modern browsers, but it's also very interesting. But with Scriptographer, what you have online is a gallery of a lot of interesting scripts, and you can download most of those, and you can see how to do things. And you've got a forum which is still active, and you've got tutorials, and you can get the scripts themselves. And you see this is a funny, I don't know, typography-looking, cute, fluffy, chubby clouds kind of generator, funny thing. I don't know. But this is quite interesting. It's kind of funny. And you can do tons of interesting stuff with Scriptographer, maybe the thing I wanted to show you quickly is that there's something called raster scripts. And raster scripts are scripts that take a raster, like a pixel image, and then do some kind of a vector, rebuild it with a vector tile of some sorts. And there's a whole category of these things here. This is kind of very, very specific, but it might be useful in some context. So look out for Scriptographer. Any questions on Scriptographer till now? Okay, check back in a few minutes. So that was Scriptographer. Keynote takes a while to perform here. And maybe this is a really geeky thing now. Maybe the mother of all of these tinkering with graphic tools is tinkering with PostScript. And let me tell you what I mean. And this is a bit more geeky than most of the things we've seen until now. But when I was in design school, we had a whole floor filled with Macs. And all of the Macs were connected to two large Xerox type printers. And all of these, everyone would send prints from all over the network, but you could only print if you swipe a credit card through some credit card swiping thing. The thing is, there was a one PC blocking all of the Mac print jobs to that printer, all blocked by that PC. That PC was filled with viruses, never worked. It was funny because it looks like the viruses are kind of bummed out because they can't move sideways to the Macs. They need PCs in the network. Well, that was another story. And something really distorted all of our print jobs. And people couldn't figure out why does it happen. And somehow being able to circumvent and kind of print around that PC without going through the card swiper, we could see that it all happens because of problems in the PC. But I'm telling you all this story because we tried at some point to say, what happens if we take a project and we try to mimic the behavior of designing something and then having it completely screwed up by something we can't control? And the way we found to do this is we take a Illustrator file, we save it to a PostScript file, which you can do if you do file print, and then you change the printer to Adobe PostScript file instead of just one of the printers you already have. And then you open that PostScript file, which is basically a text file filled with points and numbers, and you change a bunch of the numbers, and then you use Adobe Distiller, which closes it back to PDF. So this is how a PostScript file looks if you just open it with a text editor. In this case, I don't even remember what this is. So what happens if you do find and replace, find and replace, find and replace to a bunch of numbers inside here and just changes to different numbers? Pretty surprisingly, what happens is you're basically throwing a bunch of vector points around. And then when you distill it back to PDF, you get really interesting results. So the only tricky thing is not to replace simple things like ones and zeros because you're breaking the formatting of the file, but instead replace numbers like 79 or 22 with something completely different, and then it works. So then you distill it, you convert the PostScript file back to PDF, and we've used this occasionally to do a bunch of really distorted stuff. This is mostly academic work and less commercial. At least we don't get as many chances to use this. But this is the logo we've done with an A, an ampersand, and a P, and being roughly through that process and getting interesting results. These are a bunch of outline text which got the same kind of treatment, and if you have Bezier points which jump around, you get these curves. But if you have straight points, you get these pointy edges. So this is quite interesting. So that was PostScript hacking. Any quick questions on that? So you could, that's a good point about trying to use something from Scriptographer or NodeBox into Quartz Composer. So what I haven't said about Quartz Composer is, like most other Mac apps, and I'm actually getting to it in a second, all of this Mac platform has a tendency to like the format, to like the same formats. So in the same way that Keynote likes QuickTime files, Quartz Composer likes QuickTime files. In the same way that Keynote can display PDFs or PNGs, or even PSDs, or even PNGs with transparencies, and PDFs with transparency, and so forth. Quartz Composer can take PDFs inside. So if I do, it will take me a few minutes to demo it to you, but if you just take a simple Illustrator file, save just a logo in a PDF, drag that PDF into Quartz Composer, it just uses it as an image. So it just works. So basically the answer is yes, because you can get anything vector you can create in Illustrator, save a PDF and take it into Quartz Composer in the same way you can take it into Keynote. So hopefully that answers the question. Sure. So one thing I haven't told you yet is that I'm not sure if you can see this when I'm projecting this slide, but there's like a blob here that moves under the typography. And sometimes these WebEx tools has some latency, so I'm not sure you can see this animation. But this animation is a Quartz composition. So I've made a small Quartz Composer file with this blob that moves, and I've put it into Keynote in all of these slides, in the master slide of these separators. And there's a typography box above it, and there's animation below. So you get this Keynote file that is really interesting, generatively animating as we're doing it. And basically, when we were in Barcelona, I showed a demo where we take a video from the webcam and we blur it and we do a U-adjust. And we do all of that having the Mac being facing the audience, so the audience can see itself blurry and with color adjustments on the screen under the typography of the slides. So you can create a bunch of that kind of cool stuff. And we've occasionally done this with clients in presentations where we had to make a point somehow visually. So this is quite useful. So before we go into this part, I see we don't have any other questions. So what I'd like to show you now is stepping away. I'm not sure, Eva, feel free to cut me off. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but feel free. I'll try to run through this quickly.
We have around 10 minutes.
Okay, so that's perfect. That's perfect. So what I'd like to show you now is a bunch of more practical things, which are kind of Mac hacks for designers. This is less higher up with interesting tools and more deep practical stuff that exists in your Mac and you basically more or less likely not to know about. So hopefully that won't be too low-level practical for you, but I think it's quite interesting. And we use these things quite often. So first of all, the really, really interesting technical detail is, it's not a Mac-specific thing, is understanding the relationship between Adobe Illustrator files and PDF files. So some of you may know this, but this is very useful to know. Adobe Illustrator is an incredible app, specifically in one aspect, that it has something called forward compatibility. So usually apps have background compatibility. You can use a new version of Microsoft Word and open a file from way back, right? Backwards compatibility. And then you can open a file from 10 years ago and more or less it would still work, right? But you can't take an older version of Word and open a file from now. You can only do that if they haven't changed the format, but every few years they do. So you can't use a docx with Office 2005 with Office 2003. It just doesn't work. But with Illustrator, this works, and it's unbelievable. And the way that it works is because each .ai file actually has a hidden .pdf file inside. So think about Adobe Illustrator as a factory for producing PDFs. So basically, everything you can draw in Illustrator gets saved in a file that has like two components. It has the PDF of whatever you've drawn, and it's wrapped in an AI file. So this is why when you hit space on an AI file on the Mac, you get a quick look window showing you the contents. It doesn't know how to read Illustrator files, but it knows how to pick inside the PDF that is inside. And this is also why when you, let's do save this document, for example, on my desktop here for a second, sample file, and when I hit save, I get this dialog, which you probably know, but then there's this, create PDF compatible file. So this is checked by default, and as long as it's checked, there's a PDF inside hidden inside the Illustrator file. If you uncheck this and you hit OK, and I go to my desktop now, and I try to wait, the Scriptographer is kind of persistent. and I try to look for this sample file, wherever that is. Can't find it right now. What I would get is that Quick Look can show me the preview because it doesn't have a PDF inside. But this affects many, many things, because this is how Quick Look shows you the internals of an AI file. But it also means that if you take a file made in CS5 and you try to open it with CS4, it actually opens up. It kind of yells to warn you, but it opens up. The thing is, it only shows you the things which are inside artboards. So let's say you've got one canvas, and you've got a logo in the middle, and you've got a bunch of other old sketches around. When you go to Illustrator CS4, it only shows you the logo in the middle, because the logo is in an artboard. And the only things that go into PDFs are artboards. This is why it only kind of opens the part of the file that will actually go in the PDF. So this was a quite long explanation to something that is quite practical, because if you're stuck with the wrong piece of software, you can still get your stuff out as long as they're in the artboard. So hopefully that is helpful. Quick questions about that? No. Oh, sorry, not printing. So the second hack is about app bundles. So those of you who played with iOS development for a while know this thing now, maybe. But it's really, really interesting. So the Finder on a Mac has a trick, and it's called bundles. And bundles are actually folders that act like single files. And this is quite interesting, because it's something that acts like something else. Let me quickly show this to you. Apps on your Mac are actually bundles. So they're not one file, they're a folder. And iWorks files, before iWork 08 or iWork 09, whatever that was, used to be bundles, and you can extract stuff out of them by knowing that. So let me quickly show this to you. This is amazingly useful. I think I showed this to Jesper when we were in Copenhagen together. So if I go to this random app called Automator, and I right-click it, and I do show package contents, which gets me into the bundle, then I get a folder which shows me the contents of that bundle. And inside, usually, by the way, there's a folder called resources, and inside you can find all of the icons of the app, which is quite nice, also some JavaScript stuff, and also the interface builder files, which you can use to tinker the app UI, but that's for another day. And you can find all of these icons in all of these things. And the nice thing is, if you edit one of these TIFF files, which are used for icons, and you rerun the app, you see your changes in the app. So you can basically make a lot of funny stuff with it. I've basically took games for Mac and changed the graphics pixel by pixel, frame by frame for all of the characters, and completely changed the game without changing the code. Just changed all the graphics. So that's, let me show you something you might be more, if you go to iWork and you go to show package contents for Keynote, the app itself, and we go into resources, we can find all of the toolbars icons here. And this is sometimes quite useful if we need something specific, or we just need to get a file, or we just need to know how something works. And it's quite handy because you can peek inside and do a bunch of cool stuff. So that was all nice to play around with bundles, but there's another use for it. And let me give you an example. So if we've got this Keynote file, let's go to another. We've got this Keynote file of something else here, and I save it. Let's save it to the desktop for a second. Let's open a new folder here and call it a.key. And then I go to a temp, and I have this a.key. So by default, iWork doesn't save files as bundles anymore. It actually saves files as zip. So if you do a.key and you change the name to zip, and you do use zip, and then you do right-click, open with the unarchiver or anything else that opens zips, you would get a folder with the contents of the slideshow. And what is amazing about this, that you get the original assets as they were dragged into Keynote. And this also works if you take a PowerPoint file brought in from a client, open it with Keynote, save it as a Keynote file, open the zip up, and get all of the assets. And this is amazing because for us, for example, we often get content from a website, I'm not sure, a bunch of stuff, and you get all of the management photos in a Word file, and you try to convince them you can't use the Word file because it kind of shrinks the images. So Word shrinks the images, but if you open it up with Pages, save a Pages file, unzip it, you would get the original thing. So for example, for this slide deck, this is the original Designit logo PDF vector file that we've dragged into Keynote to make this slide deck. And if you had videos in this slide deck, you would get those here. Whatever file you dragged in would be the original non-changed high-res files. So this is quite an amazing trick for extracting stuff out of numbers, pages, Keynote files, and also by extension, Microsoft Office files, because you can reopen them with iWork, save it, and unzip them. So this is a huge time saver somehow. I've personally used it with Jonas's presentations from Denmark, where we needed the high-res images and we didn't want to run through the slideshow. We just grabbed all of those out of the folder. Really great. So this is quite useful. One more second for Keynote to react. And the last thing, which I'm not going to demo you, but we can talk about this, and Jesper, we talked about this when I was in Copenhagen. Fonts are actually embedded within PDFs. So again, maybe you may know this. I'll try to run through this really quickly. When you export a file into PDF, no matter what app you use this for, you do this with, Word, whatever it is, it always takes the font files and puts them inside the PDFs. Unless the font file specifically has something turned on in the fonts that says don't put me in PDFs, which is very, very rare, especially for commercial fonts which need to get into PDFs because people actually use them to print stuff. So what you can do is you can get an app for Linux or X Windows on a Mac that is called FontForge, and you can just extract fonts out of the PDFs, and you can reclose them as OpenType and TrueType files, and you can play around with them, which is quite useful. Especially if 5 minutes after you do that, you decide to buy the font file. So this is quite interesting. You should check it out. The last thing I want to quickly run through you now is this thing about PDF everywhere. So some of you may know that PostScript, printers speak PostScript. So PostScript is the markup, kind of a markup language for describing artwork that needs to be printed. Whether it is vector or pixel, it's all just PostScript. And this is how Adobe made all of its fame back in the 80s. And it's very, very useful. The thing is, PDFs are just PostScript wrappers. So if we say that an Illustrator is like a factory for creating PDFs, it's actually more true to say that Illustrator is just a factory for creating PDFs, which are just wrappers for PostScript. So the interesting thing is that Macs speak PDF quite fluently. So as we know, you can put PDFs inside Keynote, although there's a bug. And if you do this too much, the Keynote file will break, by the way. We filed a bug report, didn't get a response yet. But anyway, Keynote and Pages and Numbers and Quartz Composer and all this stuff take PDFs as an input like it's nothing, like it's just a PNG, which is something you can only dream about with Office. But also, nearly every time you see something on screen on a Mac, especially with Apple's apps, but also most Cocoa code, it's a PDF inside. So, for example, with apps that are already built in your Mac, like I'm going to show you right now, Grapher, Dictionary, Calendar, or back when I gave this, it was still called iCal. The stuff you see on screen is PDF, so you can get a PDF out of it. You can bring it again into Illustrator and use this as something that enriches your toolbox. So here's Dictionary from a Mac. I'm sure you're familiar with this. But if you do print preview, let me show you this in live. Dictionary. If I look for chinchilla, I get a definition for chinchilla, and then I can do file, print, and then within this I've got PDF right here and do save as PDF. Ooh, boom, it crashed, but I don't know what it is. I'm on macOS Mavericks, so excuse me if things crash over here. But I can save this as a PDF, I can open it in Illustrator, it works perfectly, and I get the vector and all of the type vector within my Illustrator files. So this is Dictionary. Any questions about chinchillas or not yet? So, so that's Dictionary. The other thing that is interesting is an app called Grapher. Let me show it to you now. If you go into your application window, application folder on the Mac, and you go to Utilities, you've got an app called Grapher here. And if you run it, it's basically an app for plotting graphs. But inside, in examples, you've got a bunch of sample graphs. And the interesting thing is, actually, NodeBox is based on this, at least the interface is. In what way? In the way, if you take one of these graphs, especially this one, which I really like, and you do edit, copy as PDF, which I need to select stuff, I think, edit, copy as PDF, you just go to Illustrator and you paste it like it's nothing, like it's a PDF, blah, blah, blah. There we go, vector. So, and then obviously you can use this with Illustrator in the way you would use other stuff, and you can, that was too disruptive what I did. You can run filters on it and do anything else you would do with any vector stuff in Illustrator. So it's another enrichment of the toolbox. And obviously you can go into equation by equation, play with those numbers here and get different results, although I have no idea what I'm doing. So this effect was too long in Illustrator. So that was Grapher. Whoa, I've ran a really weird effect with it. Let's do it again. Effect path, offset path, great effect by the way. Makes path thicker. So you can see that this has a lot of potential for doing vector stuff with it. The other thing the last thing I want to show you is calendar. So if you take calendar and you do, let's take, I don't know, something specific, and then you do a print, and then you can actually do, you can set, you want a weekly or a monthly calendar. Let's take the monthly and then do continue, and I get the same dialog, and I can do open save as PDF here too, and I would get the vector calendar, which is quite useful if you need to start designing a calendar now, and you quickly need all of the data well organized in one place as a starting point. So that was another example of apps on the Mac generating PDFs for you and having them take them in as the beginning or as the input for a design process. So thank you. This is kind of all we have for today. Do we have another question? Nope. Let's see.
Matrix question, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
They're typing.
Great. So in the meantime, this tiny URL is a bit old now. It holds the slides as we display them in Barcelona. Well, we resend this specific slide deck and internally with some of the files you can actually use as they are in a day or something like that. So it's not the use of these tools. There's a question here from Madrid, how widespread this is. We've occasionally used this for a bunch of projects. It was mostly me and a little bit of other guys. And it's occasionally we get more or less different chances to use these things. But we'll always try to be quite aware of possibilities of using these things and then take them in as tools that enrich our toolbox. Just an example, we're working on a website just now where we use the Grapher to generate a bunch of waves which related took into the graphics of the website, at least we tried. So it depends on the project that gives you the ability or the chance to do it, and then we can build or build a team that can play around with the stuff as we need to. So it's mostly, for a lot of times it's been just me, but occasionally we've got other guys contributing, and we've got some code abilities here, so we can do it. So Eva, if you have any summary words, but otherwise it's been pleasure talking, not per se to you, but at you at least. And you can find the slides online from here. I will send another link with everything well organized in a day or two. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Everybody's clapping. I'm sure you can hear it or see it or something. We will share this webinar with everybody. As Guy said, he will share also the presentation and some of the files. Great audience, great talk. I have learned much more things that I did in Barcelona. So thank you, Guy, and see you next time.
Sure. So thank you, everyone, and I'm available on guy.haviv, and feel free to shoot me emails, and I'd love to help. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.